You are listening to Ras Temari Radio, Offense Necessary, where we discuss everything but politics. We're here with our good friend Bailey. She's back, Bailey.
Hello there.
Thanks for coming back. We missed you.
Yeah, it's been a while.
It has
yes,
been. We did one episode that we ended up not airing, but we had episode 2. We had you on, so you're really the first sort of one-on-one person that we've had, and we talked about transition.
I remember the transition episode, right?
Right. We were talking about how you and I are part of it. There's few of us in the society, just to recap, who are transitional people, in that we're neither really diaspora nor totally Ethiopian, nor totally American. We just kind of go back and forth, which is a nice problem to have, but it brings a certain set of issues. But that's becoming more common. People like us are becoming more common as we live in this more globalized world. People who move around a lot and who, as a result, confront like identity issues.
I totally agree, because I think for people particularly who are like us, I think that by moving around and experiencing different sectors of part of the world gives us this wide scope of thinking and experiences, and that's basically what I'm thinking of.
Yeah. So we were talking about transitions last time, and for this one, I was going to ask, which is now our third sort of motto outside of everything but politics and offense necessary. What is something that you have taught yourself recently?
Okay, that's a good question. So recently I've been learning self-taught, I don't know, but language. So I've been learning Arabic a little bit. I'm not perfect. I've been dabbling here and there, so yeah. I think that could answer your question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, few skills are more useful, I think, in our world, partly from the point we just made, than language. And Arabic, along with probably Chinese, Spanish, French, English, of course. Those are probably the big 5 most useful, the broadest languages.
Especially for my work sector, I think language and is very necessary for me to and act on. So I like Arabic. It's kind of interesting, and I like the Orient and the experience of the Arab world. It's kind of cool, I guess. Yeah.
What prompted you to study Arabic?
So I think recently I've met this person that I've been seeing for a while, and somehow we kind of just he's been teaching me some Arabic languages, and it's been interesting. I mean, he's like the first Middle Eastern person that I've ever dated, so being exposed to that sector and that language has been interesting. I mean, I've had Middle Eastern friends, like Egyptian, Jordanian, Saudis and stuff, but when it's intimate and up and close and personal, it's a different vibe, I think.
And he wanted you to learn Arabic as well?
No, I did. Actually, I've loved Arabic language, I think, since I was a kid, because for people who grew up in Addis Ababa, you could relate with me on this one, because for people who have a local cable dish namin, there's an Arab sat that they could see Rotana clips, NBC Group, and other Arab channels out there. So for me, I used to love watching Rotana clip, Rotana cinema, Rotana classics, and I've just been really interested in different Arabic countries like Lebanon and other Middle Eastern countries. So it's been interesting. I don't know what the hell they were talking about, but it was cool for me.
Yeah, I remember because.
I hope you remember this.
For a long time there was no DSTV, or it was too expensive.
Course. It was
so
way
we
expensive.
all would get, everybody here would get 15, 20 channel. Of course, they expanded that you couldn't understand, and then like you would just watch the two.
It's like Indian
movie
movies
channels, right?
or something like
and then
that.
CNN, BBC.
Yeah.
I remember the one that was one of the better movie channels was called Channel 2. There's Channel 2 and Channel 1, Channel 4. I even related to this girl I was friends with in college who was from Kuwait, being like, "You see the NBC One today?" She was like, "Yeah," and I was like, "You know, at the end they always go,
too. Yes.
yeah, they always go like
Bahrain
next
TV.
Allah MGC 2, next Allah,"
Yeah.
and we called them Allah 2 and Allah 4. And she was laughing. She was like, "I didn't know that we had this reference point that people in Ethiopia got." But yeah, none of us actually understood. It's funny. One thing about Arabic, and confirm for me from what you've learned so far, very poetic language, right?
It is
very rich, descriptive language.
I mean, I'm not an Arab. I can't be able to be able to describe that in detail. But I mean, there's a lot of poets who are from Arab descendants, Persian poets, and yeah, I think that it has a poetic element to it. So there's a lot of writers and poets in the Arab nation, aside from being like a religious leaders and stuff. So yeah, I think so. I mean, from an outsider, that I could say, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and it's. I think part of the explanation is like Islamic languages in general, especially Arabic, because in Islam, one is not allowed to depict the human form, which is a big part of what Europeans, especially in the Renaissance, Michelangelo's the David, all that, sculpting the human form, the Mona Lisa, right? You're not allowed to do that in Islam. Only God can depict the human, can draw the human form, and so a lot of the creativity that was kind of placed on that in the European tradition, they channeled that creative energy and put it more into the verbal arts, either the calligraphy, for instance.
Right.
Islamic Arabic calligraphy is very, very detailed.
And their number system.
Their number system. And so also their verbal arts, but when it comes to the language itself, is supposed to be very poetic and so on. Because a lot of they kind of sublimated or channeled a lot of that energy that other cultures put into depicting the human form, into describing or expressing things
totally
verbally.
Agree.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, learning the language, so it's so weird, but the person that is giving me some pointers in the language is like, and I was telling that person, teach me how to speak Arabic, and they mentioned, no, you have to start from the insults first. I was like, what? But I thought you have to start with the local greetings and, from saying marhaba and stuff like that. But he's like, no, you have to start with the insults. And I'm like, I think, and when I asked, it was explained to me that usually when you start learning insults, you catch on the phrases and the language better. And I was like, okay, interesting. I mean, I'm not going to air it here right now, but it's very interesting how you get to learn language in a very different spectrum, I guess. So yeah, that's what I've been exposed to. It's been okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I mean, the old cliche is we were talking about this before coming on, that you only really know a language if you know the insults.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was very thrown off about. Usually you get to learn from the vocabulary, the greetings, and the vowels, and the spoken terms of it all. But now, insults is very catchy.
Yeah, it is interesting that we have this thing about insults, somehow that's what, but we know that not to be true, right? Because I know insults in German, I know insults in Sweden, I don't speak any of those languages, but I mean, actually in Wolof, and when I was living in Senegal, I knew a few of the insults. I would hear kids curse when they would miss a shot in soccer or something like that, but didn't know much beyond so greetings, basic words, for transactions, and then insults. Those are the things that you learned, and I guess you get the emotional aspect or the expression by learning the insults. Maybe that's why he told you, that's the real expression is when
of course. I was very interested about that. So it's been, for your question in general, so for me that I've been busy was learning new language as in Arabic. It's been a cool, interesting experience.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned this to you.
Yeah.
As well, that the project that I'm working on, the book that I'm working on right now, is about talking about cultural history and cultural memory at first by looking at insults. And it starts off in Ireland. The insult that's West Britain. This sort of uppity Irish guy at a party in James Joyce's The Dead is the name of the story. Has a woman approach him and make fun of him, call him West Britain, which basically means you're from the Western. You are trying to be like them, because if Ireland were a part of the Greater Britain, if it was a unitary state as opposed to its own sort of special thing,
right,
then Ireland would cease to be Ireland culturally, so it would just become the western part of Britain, hence West Britain. And then there's parallels to Carlton Banks in our generation, which has become an insult, which just comes from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
Of course.
And, Uncle Tom, which is another literary reference. Banda in Ethiopia, collaborator, assimile in Senegal. There's all these ways of insulting people for not knowing their place, or for this kind of behavior, that kind of behavior, right?
Above all and everything.
Right, and that kind of like understanding that relationship unlocks a lot of other things. But yeah, I mean, there's something about the insult, about the curse word. One of the references.
It's memorable. That's why it's like people prefer to put the insult out there than. I think it's more memorable. I think.
Yeah, it sticks with you.
It sticks with you. Exactly.
Right. When you're a kid, what you remember is when somebody called you a bad word.
Yeah, it's like the F always sticks in the head. But if you say something in a nice gesture, I mean, in life, everything bad is memorable than the good.
Right. The traumas are what you.
The trauma, or people are fickle in a way where people don't remember the good thing that you have done for them. They remember the bad things,
Right.
Something like that. I don't know.
Right. Our minds tend to draw towards the negative when we start mining the past.
And for the insults, that goes for that too, I think.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just interesting that we have this tradition of insulting. I mean, in West Africa, it's called insulting cousins, where you go to somebody. Now, this is unthinkable in Ethiopia. Unthinkable in Ethiopia, unless you're in they say Harar. In that region, they use a lot of
Somali region around Moyale. They're pretty chill.
Yeah, and I mean, people use Inatkan or whatever every other word, and it's understood as we're kind of disempowering the word, kind of like black people are talking about the N-word, being disempowered by overusing it to the point that it loses all meaning. Right. West Africans and black Americans are mostly descended from West Africa, have this tradition of insulting cousins. The insulting cousins, which is to say, you meet somebody, you're like, where's your tribe? Oh, you're from that tribe? Well, then you're my slave. We conquered you. You're like haha. And if you're from Ethiopia, if you're from one of these a little bit more...
Are you serious? Are you I was about to swear people, but people get really hot-blooded when you insinuate something like this. They would be really pissed off. They're like, excuse me,
especially if they're from a culture that is,
I mean, we're very diverse. If you say something to piss someone off, I mean, the result is traumatic, I think.
Especially if you're from a culture that's docile, that's like Ethiopians tend to be a little bit more...
proud.
Proud, and also a little bit, God-fearing, very humble or whatever. You don't assert yourself as much, but that seems to be more of a West African, Black American thing.
Of course. With Ethiopians, I don't think it works. I don't know about the other Eastern African regions, but for us particularly, that is super offensive, I think. Don't you think so?
Yeah, I mean... I could understand if you walk into a situation of social conventions, and I've had this with a lot of West Africans that I've dealt with. Not everybody, I don't want to generalize. But having grown up in West Africa, even now when I run into West Africans, they'll be nice or whatever, but there might be a little bit of good-natured ribbing. Trying to get under your skin, just kind of ribbing you a little bit. And that might be it's really a way of deflating tension. That's what they say about it. And so insulting cousins. It's like, I meet you, we don't know each other, I'm just going to insult you to your face, you insult me to your face. And it's kind of we get that out of the way kind of thing. And now let's be nice to each other, right? I mean, this even happens in the physical aspect. I've heard a lot of people talk about this. Black people in the U.S. who might be... because black men are more aggressive or whatever, and more historically dominated groups. This comes up in this Native American writer, Sherman Alexie, writes about it. White people don't get into fights. They don't hit each other. Hitting each other, you don't hit each other at home. People don't hit each other. There's no hard knock life, right? Especially if they're of a wealthy background. You just do not hit people. The black kids, the brown kids,
they try to compromise and do a mediation.
Or they masmasal. They act like they posture or whatever. Whereas black people... to get into these big fist fights. But the idea is, you get into a fight with someone, often that's like the person you will get along with the most afterwards, right? Because you get out all your aggression. Like, I know there was one guy in my community. He especially used to hit me all the time. But we used to, he was just a very aggressive guy. But we used to fight. And then, even though we're very different personality-wise, he and I always had this very powerful bond. Like, listen, like, I'll never be that mad at you. You'll never be that mad at me because we got it all out of the way, right? When we were kids.
But you're a guy. I mean, from a, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
From a girl perspective, like, okay, from my perspective, yeah, there might be some other mean girls who wanted to beef with me, but I used to fight back. I'm like, you're not gonna make me go through all that shit, you know?
Yeah.
Because it's like, who the hell are you to bully me? And I was not giving up. And I think with women and girls, it's more personal because once we are in that, once you screwed me over type of mantra, we don't go back. We maybe for people who are more vindictive or something like that, they would go above and beyond to hurt you. But for guys, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, we used to beat each other up, ha 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 ha.
Right.
Now we're
joke,
homies, we're friends. But for girls, it's like, oh, okay, we're friends. And
yeah, but there's always in the back of your mind.
of course.
That
I mean, you will mess that person up. I mean, or you won't. It depends on that person. But I think it's different for the genders.
Oh, and it's different for the audience when it's different genders. I mean, two guys fight. It can be, if it's a real fight, it can be a real scary thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? People are really gonna mess each other up. Two women fight. The few times that I've seen two women that I've known fight within a community, everybody kind of gathers and watches and is kind of amused.
Because it turns you on.
No. No, I promise you it wasn't a sexual thing. It's
for some people.
Maybe for some people, but it's
like,
mostly
ooh,
it's a
let me
curiosity.
Just watch her take her wig off or her stafat avliyat or I want to see her tits or something. Some
I don't know about
idea.
that. It's not likely to happen, but to me it's
or
more
the drama. Some people love the drama.
The drama,
right?
It is kind of amusing because again, women don't normally resolve their differences in that way, right? Or at least it's not
because
really
that's
socially
why
accepted.
guys are like really want women to be like alto. You get high on that. Okay, see faju might to see that.
I promise you,
No,
I had
I'm
nothing
not
to do with that particular
okay,
fight,
like
but yeah.
most guys are like that because it's like they get this high of when women are like are fighting or bickering on their throats and stuff. And no, it's just I don't know why y'all enjoy it.
Yeah,
and women fall for it. They're not in all solidarity and unity, but they're like and nothing gets resolved.
Yeah, I could see that. But regardless, I mean, I think insults, fighting, clashes, definitely culturally conditioned, definitely dependent on gender and on the cultural context, the way in which people bout at each other. But I do think sometimes, and it's a thin line, can actually be healthy to get your aggression out, to get your point across, as opposed to allowing that passive aggressive. You know what I mean? Like allowing things to drag on or irritations or you know what I mean? Like because it will resurface much later, especially if it's continued. Right? So sometimes when both sides are like, hey, let's stop shielding ourselves here. Let's put it aside. Let's get it out of the way. I always point this out, that one thing, not that the whole conversation was supposed to be about fights, but one thing that I find culturally accepted or common in Ethiopia that I think most people from the States just find absolutely unacceptable is for more than one person to fight one person. Like, I'll see people fighting, and I'll be like, these two guys are going to fight. Everybody else stay out.
Yeah, it's the same as in Haiti. So, yeah.
As it is here?
Yeah, it's kind of messed up, but yeah, I totally understand what
if you are a thief, or if you're a group of thieves and you're jumping somebody to steal something from them, that's one thing. But if you're having a fight, like a fight, like an emotional fight, 2-on-1, I mean, what? Like, you think you got a victory by beating somebody? Now, you might try to protect somebody. You might try to pull them out of the fight, or you might just try to wave it off and try to, hey, you guys relax. But if you're actually going to inflict pain, I don't think 4 guys beating up on a guy makes them jugna. I don't think it makes them tough. And in the States, the accepted, even legally accepted, convention is, let's take this outside. You're at a bar. You don't want to disrupt anybody else. Let's go. Let's take this outside. Let's fight. Whoever wins, wins. Usually everybody gets their aggression out. When the cops come, they usually will. Somebody will call the cops. They'll be like, oh, you guys said let's take it outside and you fought? Well, then that's that. Nobody assaulted anybody, right?
Yeah, but the thing is...
Everybody's fine with it.
Yeah, I mean, but you can't compare America with Ethiopia. Like, America's like a first world country. Ethiopia,
Please tell me how the economic situation justifies
in
four
terms
guys
of,
beating
like,
up one guy.
and thinking and like expansion, worldly thinking. Like the way we think is different from a particular American.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
But
No,
not
I
in
agree.
terms of economic side. Like you get my point.
No, I agree. Of course, I'm not saying that everything in the U.S. has to be the same as in Ethiopia, nor am I the cliched guy, I never have been, who says that American cultural norms are superior and that Ethiopia should accept.
Everyone is unique in their own way.
I've spent, there were many years throughout my childhood where even when I was living in West Africa, where I was coming to Ethiopia for a significant period of time, 2-3 months and all that, and hadn't gone to the States in years and years and years. Right, and I'd forgotten what the States was like, but Ethiopia was always a part of my childhood, so it's not like that. But I just think this one aspect, and I'm not the biggest fan of American culture either, to the extent that such a thing exists. Yeah, I mean, Americans are like some of the least cultured people, or at least sort of aesthetically pleasing people. I mean, Americans just believe everything has to be as bland as possible, and that's what they love. But all that said, on this one, the idea that two guys fight it out and nobody else is allowed to get involved. Because otherwise there's a sucker punch too. I mean, there's also the concept of sucker punch. Hitting someone from behind. I was telling you about an incident just now, right?
Yeah.
That was somebody coming from behind and hitting someone, grabbing somebody. I mean, that's an ambush. Like, that's not a fight. You didn't win, right? You ambushed that person. But I guess that's what the British soldiers, the Redcoats, were saying about the American guerrilla warrior fighters who won the Revolutionary War. Ironically, that's how the United States became independent of Britain, because the British had the British, but they were willing to hide and ambush and not fight the proper gentlemanly way. But still, I think soldiers, war, laws of war, conventions, that's one thing.
I mean, still, war strategy is different. It varies from place to place, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And guerrilla warfare tactics are accepted now. I just think if you're going to be kind of like, not to sound sexist, but a man about it. Right, like if you're gonna be a man about it, like
step up to the plate.
Right, and also you're not a tough guy if 4 people beat up one guy. The fact that you were able, like, people who think like I'm a strong person because I, along with 3 other people, took down one person. I mean, there's something kind of animalistic about it, like pack animalistic about it, and it's disturbing to me that is in any way. Thieves, okay, they're trying to rob you. That's not an emotional based fight. But anything else, I think you just kind of handle it one-on-one. But anyway, we went from insults, fighting insults to yeah. But this is getting back to our discussion of transitional perspective, which is to say going back and forth and always kind of weighing things. Use the French expression comme ci comme ça, right? Like sort of, kind of. It's funny when you said that. I was thinking of Danny, who I'd like to get back on here at some point. Danny, the Jewish American fellow.
Yeah, he's not here yet, right?
Oh, maybe not. I call him every so often. I thought he had heard that he was back.
Oh,
but he very politically active, very intelligent, artistic kind of guy. We had a great time doing an episode here, and I want to have him back as much as possible. But Danny is very much a transitional figure, but going back and forth and has all these connections to Ethiopia and so on. But Danny was saying Jewishness. We were talking about the Jewish experience, talking about transitional diasporic people. He was like, the Jewish thing is always meh, and he's nobody can see me doing this because it's audio, but moving my hand, moving your hands up and down like a scale. I also can't do the Jewish accent, but like he was doing that, like kind of, you know what I mean, like a lot of indecision, a lot of mediation. I express, does that mean that the Jewish character is thought of as sort of effeminate? He was like, not effeminate, but just kind of, I mean, people who are in the finance, people who have to play intermediary roles and who have to kind of acclimate and who always have to kind of be open-minded as a result. Or open to, but perhaps not in recent years, but in the transition of the, specifically the Jewish diaspora in Europe for many years, where they're kind of on the edges of society and very vulnerable. they kind of had to acclimate and be chameleon-like.
True.
And as a result, you become a little bit indecisive, a little bit too like open-minded to a fault. Yeah, wishy-washy, right? Comme si, comme ça. You know. And that's even expressed in the sounds of Jewishness or of Hebrew, of Yiddishness. And it's expressed in their position in society and politically and so on, and in the way in which they're often scapegoated. Not just by Hitler, but others from many years before. But yeah, so there is some combination of this discussion, and
it's very interesting. I mean, I've never thought of it in that spectrum, but yeah.
And as far as insults, some of the more humorous and some of the more pervasive insults come from Yiddish, right? Like schmuck. You're a schmuck. Yeah. You're a putz. You hear that in American English among white people, not even just Jewish people, but like in you're general. A putz. Yeah, you're a punk. You're like they'll throw out a lot of I can't think of any others right off the top of my head. I don't speak Yiddish, but you hear it, especially in the Northeast, where there's a large Jewish community. You hear all the throwing out of the Yiddish expressions here and there to sort of throw people off. And
I mean, it works for them, I think.
Yeah, I think so. We
don't know.
would have that penny hunt,
Of course.
Yeah. But there's not much of a Jewish community out in Texas, right?
I don't think so. I don't know, to be honest. I know that it's densely populated of Black, Hispanic community.
Yeah.
And Latino and Black people, but
Yeah. Because the
and
overall...
Caucasian, of course, but Jewish, not really. Yeah, because it's a Christian state, so... Right.
They all are in the U.S., but
I mean, in terms of Texas, in particular,
yeah, very, very, very.
They're very Christian. But nowadays, Latinos are turning Muslims, but
oh yeah.
Yeah.
How so?
I've been seeing a documentary yesterday, not Ganwi, Vice documentary. Latino people are, transitioning to Islam religion, and now it's very interesting.
Why?
I don't think the Catholicism is not fulfilling their needs, مثلا. And that's just people are embracing that religion. And no, I was very surprised. I was just checking out some documentary, and and now
Texan Latino Muslims.
Not just Texan, they were even found in Chicago.
Okay.
So it's all over the states. Again, I was just very surprised. I've never imagined a Latino being a Muslim. And now it's just
me neither. I never even heard of it.
Never. Maybe a Buddhist, but
well, they did. Latinos ultimately, the language at least is mostly Spanish and Portuguese.
Yeah, but they do everything that they teach the Quran in Hispanic.
Yeah, in Spanish. But it's there was a massive wave several times of the Islamic Conquest, at the early days of Islam, they were all the way into the Moors and so on, all the way into the Iberian Peninsula, and all the way into Turkey. They took over 1453, right? Second of Constantinople. They established the Ottoman Empire, but where the Byzantines were. But the other really interesting battles in the first century after Muhammad, the 8th century. This is 732 BC or AD. Very important.
I don't know the numbers, so
732 AD. This is a really fascinating little story, right? The strongest Islamic conquest was actually early in the Middle Age period. This is 732 AD. Right. This is when Christianity had only been had taken a hold of Europe for a few hundred years. They went all the way across North Africa, which they had done a couple times, and go into, since you were talking about Latinos or Spanish-speaking people or Muslims, there were influxes into Spain several times. That's also why there was the Spanish Inquisition and so on later on. Although I think that was to get rid of Jews specifically. But they go into...
I do not know that.
Yeah, they go into Europe, and...
I just know the Europe, Africa, North Africa... Africa as in Central Africa, and not Eastern Africa, and also the Northern Africa and Algiers,
and Senegal, where I grew up, 95%
Mali,
far west.
And I do not know about this.
Yeah. So there's a massive influx of people that start going up into Spain and into France. And at the time that they go into France, the Islamic conquest, that first one, 732, there's a battle in Poitiers, which I think is pretty close to Paris. Poitiers, It's a little town in France where at the time there was like the Burgundian and the Frankish kings were pushing back. Long story short, the Burgundian and the Frankish kings, the early French people, the medieval French people, win that battle. But most military historians, this is the one interesting thing about military history, most military historians believe that if that battle had gone differently, that since there was nothing else really...
France would not have existed.
Not just France, West Europe entirely may very well have been Muslim early on. And Christianity would have been a blip, a 300-year blip on the radar for the Roman Empire, and then a couple hundred years after the fall of Rome, and then, bam, suddenly... Who knows? Western Europe is Muslim. America is Muslim. Who knows?
I was about to get to that point. I mean, after I saw the documentary, so there was this reporter asking, like, the Latino Muslim community, how does it feel to, like, embrace Islam? They're like, it's wonderful. This is my right path. Because when the reporter asked, like, the governor of that state, he was, like, very uncomfortable with it, has this ignorance, and it's just like, I mean, at the end of the day, does it really have to matter? So religion and spirituality, I think it depends on that person. I think he could be or she could be whatever they want. So that's just, to be honest, I feel like Muslim haymanutu, like, it's a very diverse element. It's like you could find a lot of people from different parts of the world who embrace Islam and mikatalu. That's just, it's very interesting.
Yeah, no, it is.
It's very dynamic in terms of, like, globalization.
Yeah. It ties people together, right? So they say from Jakarta to Dakar, the capital of Senegal.
From Japan, I mean, like, Mexico, like I've seen in the documentary, it's just, it's a very interesting...
I mean, that's so funny that the Islamic sphere could expand even further east-west, because
I'm very surprised,
Jakarta to Dakar, we're talking about more than half the globe span east-west, in that direction. And so the fact that it would be going even further into the United States, I mean, Islam does have a tendency, just what we're seeing that in Ethiopia, right? Where Islam is by far outpacing Orthodox and the other communities are very small. It was one thing, we were talking about Jewishness, though.
Okay.
Isn't it odd that the Jewish population in the United States is like 1%, 2%?
What about in Israel? Like,
in the United States.
Oh.
Israel is like 10 million people. Israel's like the size of New Jersey. And it's on the news all the time, and the Israeli-Palestine, but it's a tiny country that just has a huge effect on everything else.
I just imagine them being, like, in a little country, overpopulated.
Densely populated, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and especially since there's a lot of, like, desert, or there's a lot of sparsely populated. I can't really speak too much on that, but it is funny that the Jewish community in the United States is like sometimes you see them as 2% of the people. Because, I mean, listen, I live mostly on the coast, but still, I met Jewish people all the time. I meet Jewish Americans here. I met Danish, right. New York alone, you would think, would have about 1% of the, of course, New York, total, all of New York is about 1/3%. It's like 0.3% of the American population, maybe less, maybe 0.25% in greater New York. But still, I mean, all throughout the East Coast, all throughout California, very, very densely populated, or very populated places, lots and lots and lots of people of Jewish heritage, and yet they only make up 1 or 2 mil. And I guess placed in certain, finding ways to place themselves in certain, but out of survival, right? And as a result, often described. I mean, one of the most widely circulated documents, I read a chapter about this in the Sumerian book, in history, is something called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. And it's the ultimate, like, conspiracy theorist book. And that it's a fabrication. First of all, let's be clear. It's a forgery. It's a fabrication.
Of what?
Of the elders of Zion. Zionism. Like the elders of Jewish, their protocols, their meeting minutes. Where they sit down and lay out why would they write this down? Why would it leak, etc. If they're so powerful, right? But this is the fiction, is that these Jewish leaders came together. This is a forgery dating back to the Tsar's Russia about 120 years ago. So the guy forges this document that says that the Jewish people had been inventing had this conspiracy that they were going to take over the world and overthrow every non-Jewish population and subvert them through, I think it was media, it was this, it was that. They had all these like plans that they were laying out for the global Jewish conspiracy, which if it was true, they certainly haven't done it yet. I don't know what they're waiting for, but really, like this is endemic. This idea of scapegoating, of like blame one group of people for all of the problems, and that set the stage for what happens some years later with World War One and ultimately World War Two, right, which is all of the anger is directed at Jewish
it added
people.
up things after things, and made things more complicated.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there's a vulnerability in being a diasporic community.
Of
being
course,
transitional.
always. What? Are you kidding?
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, you're the easiest person to scapegoat.
Yeah.
So,
Like, you're put in this weird place where you have to choose all the time. You have to be cordial all the time because you get the feeling. I mean, it's kind of a very tricky place to be in.
Right. Right. It's not always, but now at the same time you do get the scope of experiences.
But like, okay, like let me ask you, like as a diaspora person, how would you feel? Like, do you feel like accepted for being Irish? For me, like when as a Ethio-Haitian American person, it's long, I know. For people like in my Haitian community, like people who are Haitian diaspora, if they go back to IT, they're not considered Haitians. They're not good enough. Ethiopians a little bit. I think after this homecoming campaign by the government, people's ababil towards Ethiopian diaspora has been better. What do you think before and after? What was your experience with on this? It's like murky waters, but like I hope you get my point.
No, I do. I think when you're transitional, people have a way of targeting people in diasporic communities, but also there's an advantage to that in the long run.
Okay.
Because I think diasporic communities become hardened to the reality of it and have even more solidarity. And I see this with the Jewish population in Europe. They had nothing but each other, and they didn't have the same rules. Like, for instance, banning usury. This is the reference to Shylock, the Jew in Merchant of Venice. They didn't have the same. It would be nice to have a Jewish person on here when we're talking Jewishness, but we'll hopefully.
I mean, it's not with just Jewish, but just like it could be French, it could be Dutch, it could be whatever.
If you want to survive as a diasporic community over many centuries, you have to use whatever opportunity you can, and you have to have solidarity and a real sense of identity. And be resilient, and even then, a guy like Hitler could come around, and you never know,
wipe
right?
You out,
right. I mean, the Roma, the people referred to as gypsies, have that same people like, oh my God, they have no values. Oh, they'll rob you, whatever. They only care about each other. Well, this is what happens when people are, pushed around and abused by other populations for as long as they. Who was it? Who we came here and we had a conversation about? Oh, I think it was Iman. And I had this whole conversation about I think gypsy comes from gups, gyps, as in they were attributed this identity of being Egyptian, but so there are all these diaspora
Caucasian identity, like Romania,
Yeah. See, now I'm forgetting. I think their origin is somewhere in India, but the trouble. Anyways, Egypt is a complete misattribution.
Exactly.
They're not at all from from that part of the world. But again, it's
to my question for you to address. What do you like? Personally, Zodi, as a transitional person, how did that affect you? What's your intake on that?
Well, see, that was actually what you said previously, where you said, as a diaspora. People think of me as a diaspora. I'm not a diaspora. People who are born in the U.S. are not diaspora, because I never left. Diaspora means you were dispersed from Ethiopia. Exactly. I might be a child of a diaspora who came back or whatever it is, but it's complicated. But see, that's the thing. Like, the words escape you, Masayim. our first theme. The words, the names, the labels. Yeah. And as a result, I'm very resistant to labels. I hate being labeled. Because what happens when you get labeled is people make assumptions about that label, and now suddenly you are responsible for other people's assumptions about people of a certain label, and also you're responsible for the behavior. You're responsible for other people who happen to share that label, whether or not they attribute to themselves that label in the same way, right? Or if it means the same thing to them. But now you are labeled one thing, they're labeled them. So the two of you are the same. You have to believe in certain things. So you're putting yourself in a box in that way and making yourself more vulnerable when you are labeled. That's why I'm saying that a person who escapes labels or just isn't used to or is used to reinventing themselves, moving on, going from one place to another, and who can adapt easily, that's the advantage of being diasporic. And that's why, Jewish people are like, how did the Jewish people... Because they have diaspora built into their culture, right, in a way that very few other groups do. And so as a result, they have to be resilient and adaptable. And I think I have those attributes, as well as sometimes a sense of, I wish I was rooted somewhere, which is why I've been in Ethiopia for 6 years. And all things being equal, I have no problem living the rest of my life here. Because I like the idea of being rooted in one place. It just so happens that this is a one of many. But regardless of what it is, I was just with a person just last night, a friend of the family, older lady, who's been a friend of my parents and so on, of our community. Exactly, for about 70 years, or she's about 60, 70 years old. And she's been in the same town in Europe for 52 years. And I was telling her, I was joking with her, I was like, I don't know a single other person who can say they lived in one place for 53 years. You must love it there. She's like, I love it there. Right, I love it there, and she's diaspora, and she moves around a lot. She travels. She has family in the States. She has family here, or whatever. But she loves being rooted there. That's where she raised her kid. That's where she, you know what I mean. And I sense that there's a comfort level of like and she is in a college town as an older woman, But I'm fond of that idea. As much as it is nice to travel, moving kind of sucks, right? Like moving sucks. Even moving like down the block to a new house, having to pick up all your stuff and move it there, and then having to get acclimated and comfortable with a new place for the first couple of months and dealing with all of the crap that comes with moving. I moved 5 times in 1.5 years. A couple of years ago for a million different reasons within Addis Ababa, and I've been in my current residence for about 1.5 years, and I just love the fact that I haven't moved or I'm not thinking about moving.
It's stressful, but I totally understand what you mean. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, so what do you think of the whole great homecoming vibe that we're into right now? Like,
well, that's a good topic for us to talk about. We haven't discussed that.
Yeah, that's why I'm mentioning it right now. The homecoming. What do you think? What's your perspective? For me, my perspective of it is like too little, too late. Yeah. Because it's like they should have done this campaign 10 years ago. Yeah. But now, I mean, I'm glad that they did it, but like I feel like it's a little bit too late.
Well, why is it too late?
Because the solidarity should have come way past, not now. Like it would have been better if it was done 10 years ago and had this, like you said with the Jewish, if they had this diaspora mentality in them. I think the time span is kind of off for me.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's necessarily too late, but it's not the best time, and yes, it is.
It's not the best time due to the political situation. Right. It's like, I wish it would have been more,
I guess my feeling about it, I haven't been paying too much attention to it.
That I have.
Yeah.
That's why
I want to hear your thoughts once I answer, but I really want to hear what your thoughts are about. But to me, sometimes the inconsistency of policy and law and incentivization is maddening to me, because suddenly there'll be a 0% tax on such and such items to bring back, and then they were like, oh, people are abusing. Okay, let's put it back to 100%. It's like, what about 75? What about 25? What about 50? You know what I mean? Things have to happen a little bit incrementally. Yeah, and people need to know ahead of time. Otherwise, they make plans, and then suddenly they're and then that makes people in the long run resistant to investment. This is considered a volatile
scared
concept.
Like,
and as a result, that pushes away investors. So one thing about, that's great that you put all these incentives for diaspora, but going along with what you're saying, I've tried to invest here before. Others I know have tried to invest in Ethiopia before.
You know why I'm asking this question? So, like, my brother, he lives in Switzerland, and he came for the holidays, Christmas and Dumkets. And so this great homecoming campaign tajamere, everybody was getting hyped up, and I think the government rallied all diasporans up, and they were giving him itinerary plans, what they're gonna do, what kind of money they're gonna pitch in,
right?
The manamin, but like, okay, great, that's great. I'm really happy that they're doing it, but how much is it worth it?
Well, I agree.
Is it just a publicity stunt in a way? Is it like يقتلال?
Right. It has to be persistent. That's exactly the thing. Because when they don't do that, and the reason I'm not paying attention to it. I don't care if anybody wants to attract diaspora dollars, because at this point I'm like, you know what? Tomorrow you might go the complete opposite direction. Because it tends to. It's not just that things change quickly. It's like a pendulum swinging back and forth from one extreme to another.
Unpredictable. Yes,
right. And so as somebody who's trying to invest, there's a small amount of funds here. Come through the diaspora, I was like, I had to explain to people, at banks and so on, I was like, no one is going to invest if you make it like, well, we want, start a dollar account, but 50% of it, or maybe 60 or maybe 70% of it stays in Birr. So what are you really doing? You're trying to lure me into a trap that I can see coming.
Yeah.
Or be like, hey, invest in this or that bank share, but there's a 50% fee to invest, and I'm like, so if I want to invest in something, I have to lose half of it up front. You never, if you're trying to attract investment, you never put a fee or a tax on that initial investment, right?
That's
maybe
like
a small
stocks,
tax,
like,
right?
High investment, low,
low. What's the residual or low?
Something.
Yeah,
you get my point.
Starts with the D. Dividends.
Dividends, something.
Yeah,
like
something
that.
like that. But so I'm not a big stock guy, but it's
economic people.
You if you put a tax on stocks or put a tax on any kind of investment, it's because you're trying to limit that investment. Just like when you try to mess with the interest rates, right? You increase the interest rates when you're trying to slow down the rate of investment because you're afraid of inflation, because you're afraid of this or that, right? You don't put it on there if you're trying to attract investment. And then, so one day, there's taxes on this, there's hidden fees on that, there's all this volatile. And then the next day, we're going to try and try. In the long run, the problem is you've created a volatile context that people cannot predict. And in that context, people can lose everything tomorrow, and you'll be like, oh, shucks. Well, as long as you create that context, don't expect too many people to invest no matter how much you try and incentivize them with the flavor of the month, right?
To add another point to your suggestion, like the Great Homecoming was pretty good. I liked everything that they did. Again, right after the Ethiopian Christmas was about to end, politically there were some certain people who were detained kaza tafatu, and it kind of messed Addis Ababa and other regionals. They're like, why? Because it's like, from a diaspora perspective, they have their own say. The government has its own say. People are like, why is this happening? And it's just, I don't know, man. It's just, right now, the homecoming is just, it's not the right time. It's just with the whole political standpoint and whatnot. So, yeah.
Yeah.
It's sad. We'll see how it goes. It seems promising, but there's a lot of murky waters ish around it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, it
needs a lot of work.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mess we find ourselves in when it comes to a lot of things. Addis Ababa is a glorious mess, but at the same time, Naomi Klein. Yeah, Naomi Klein's book. I mean, we used to say this when I was younger, that there's this like chaotic harmony about Addis Ababa in the 90s and in the 2000s. I think a lot of things about Addis Ababa in the last 10 years or so, I feel have kind of gone in a direction that am not as fond of just the city itself. Although the beautification has been amazing.
Amazing.
I love what the city looks like.
Especially the new library. It's amazing.
Yeah. I'm with that. And aesthetics do matter. It does matter.
Representation.
Absolutely, representation. But even internally, like how we see ourselves. You don't want to live in a trashy house, so why would you want to live in a trashy city? So I'm all for investing in that, and along with investing in social policy and that kind of thing. But Naomi Klein has this book called The Shock Doctrine.
Okay.
Where she talks about how capitalism works through certain shocks. And she draws on early on in the book on the example of New Orleans. And New Orleans after Katrina and how it was an opportunity. They even say this in Game of Thrones. I don't know if you ever watched Game of Thrones.
Yeah, of course I do.
Well, you remember when Littlefinger, who is all about this, chaos, right? Chaos is a ladder, right? When he goes up to Tywin and he goes, I always think that a crisis affords an opportunity because he's trying to forge an alliance between them and the Tyrells. But it's actually a cliche at some point because Tywin goes, well, you say that like you're the first man to think it. Yes, a crisis affords an opportunity. So what? Right? Like, what about it? So it's understood among capitalists that, when do you get the biggest gain in the stock market? What day do you get the biggest gain in the stock market? The day after you get the biggest crash. Because that's when everybody's like, oh, crap, disaster, everything's falling through.
Desperation happens.
Right. And you also, Hernando de Soto has this book about title deeds. I forget what the book was called, but it was this really brilliant. It's a really brilliant book about what is lacking in the developing world. And he was like, countries like Ethiopia are sitting on dead capital. They're sitting on dead capital because there's no title deed for property. And that's really the key to actually developing these areas is by investing in title, investing in and actually creating capital that is there, that has the potential to be there. And a lot of that has to do with beautification and so on and so forth. But there's all this opportunity. There's all this, but the fact that, I met an American guy, I think I mentioned this some years ago, brilliant guy, who I'm sure is doing amazing things with his life now. One of the most impressive individuals I met. Right after college, he came here, and he wanted to work here, and he was like, developing world, developing countries, this is the frontier. This is where things could really advance. This is where there's all kinds of opportunity.
But does that work for Ethiopia? That's the question. For other African nations or other developing countries, I agree.
I can't really say. This is not my field. And I try to show restraint about not talking about things on the air that I don't know very well.
Of course.
But I would say I can say one thing for sure. When it comes to opportunity, both when it comes to economic opportunity, that frontier mentality, investment and all that, and also culturally, intellectually, the volatility of the situation creates a lot of risk, but with high risk also there's high reward, right? You really want to get rich quick. You're better off, or in an entrepreneurial kind of vein, you're better off in Ethiopia than you are in the United States, because everything has been done 1,000 times over.
Right.
But you also run risks that, hey, they could come and slap a tax on you or completely undermine, or you might be deemed politically this or that, and that's not just with the current government, that's just the way it is in Ethiopia, going back to Haile Selassie's time, is there's always volatility. The one consistency is inconsistency, right? If things were more stable, we'd be weirded out, right? Because instability is the rule. So when people talk about, that's the other reason why I'm not completely turned off to this country as far as investment. People, every couple of weeks, people are like, the sky is falling. There's going to be this war or this conflict, or there's going to be martial law or this. And I'm always like, dude, just wait a few weeks and it'll calm down, because that's always been Ethiopia. If there's not a war with Eritrea, there's a war in Tigray. If there's not this or that situation politically, there's just that situation economically. Instability is the rule.
Yeah, I think it's a way of thriving in that instability. That's what matters in this country. I think being like when you thrive on that chaos, you either sink or swim. I mean, it depends for people. And I like to play it safe. I don't like whenever some things turn up and just get ruined. I don't want my time and my energy and my money to be just, squashed over and be like, oh, whoops, ha ha ha. It's heartbreaking because it's disheartening, and I don't know. Like for me, I don't want to dabble on that. It's a lot to sacrifice being a Muslim. I don't know for other people and for you, but I don't know. I would like to play it
just
safe.
did the thing, the Jewish thing that we were talking about.
Yeah.
Comme si, comme ça. Yeah. But see,
scary.
that's what exposure does to you, right? The more you learn, you'll notice the most ignorant people you meet. I'm not talking about people who are stuck in one place necessarily, but the most ignorant
what? Like,
in general.
Oh.
If somebody doesn't know much, a child, or just an ignorant person, Mahayim, somebody who hasn't read, the more sure of themselves they are. Blissfully sure of themselves. The more a person learns, usually the more humble they are, because they're around other people who taught them, who are more intelligent than they are. This is also why self-educated people have a problem. Self-educated, autodidacts, we talked about self-education, Ras Temari. Self-educated people often have this problem where they learn on their own and therefore do not necessarily bow down to the master, to the teacher or whatever. They're not used to having
They are their own apprentice.
Right, so there's an arrogance that comes with being self-educated.
Right.
There's often an arrogance with I'm the only one who knows, right? Especially if you come from a society where people aren't educated like you, where you're the intelligent.
The Mecca or the Messiah.
Right. They used to say this about Melis. Melis was a brilliant guy, but also very arrogant because he was always the smartest person in the room. Especially since he for the most, he went to Addis Ababa University, but like for the most part, he taught himself.
He wanted to be like a brain surgeon, Mom.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, he probably could have been.
He could.
But all this is to say, I mean, we're kind of going around on a number of interrelated subjects.
I like our conversation.
Yeah,
we're going about and about. I mean,
right. But all this is to say, the more you learn, generally, the more humble you become, because the main thing that you learn is that you don't know anything.
Yeah,
in the grand scheme of things.
You're eager.
Yeah, whereas the less you know, the more sure of yourself are, and there is bliss. Ignorance is bliss.
True.
Not knowing what's out there is kind of a nice place to be.
Sometimes.
You ever look at an animal and kind of as much as it sucks to be an animal compared to a human being, like they're not burdened with knowing anything. Right, they just kind of are in the moment. Yeah. Human beings, especially people who are educated or exposed in other ways, right, like transitional people, diaspora communities, are weighed down by all this knowledge. Which, on the one hand, makes you more adaptable and more open-minded,
more expensive.
Yeah, and more malleable.
Yeah.
Right, more willing to flexible. I mean, and also at the same time, you're a little bit more. On edge or
too assertive.
Yeah, I would actually argue not assertive. No, you're not in a position to be assertive. Right?
Oh no, yeah, you're right.
Right. It's easier to assert yourself when you have backup. When you have a lot of people backing you up, and that usually means that you are coming from a really strong community. At the same time, so there are all these paradoxes, right? Like everybody wants to fit in. Especially when they're young, to know their group, to have a crowd.
No, like social inclusion, it's not just when you're young. I mean, when you're young, it's like amplified, but when you're like even a grown up, the shit continues.
Yeah, absolutely. I was using that as an example.
Oh,
but yeah. No, absolutely. Everybody, when we, in socialization, it's all about fitting in. It's all about learning how to maneuver within a larger. But at the same time, sometimes you learn how to fit in and maneuver by not belonging to a single crowd and kind of being on your own and kind of having to, when you go traveling.
your own way in again.
Yeah, when you go traveling in Europe, part of me always liked to have people there. Like I felt more rooted when I was traveling with my traveling companions.
With a native
but part of me is actually like it's better when you travel by yourself, because as depressing as it can be, when you travel by yourself, you are forced now to get out of your zone and go and speak to somebody, right? Like, as opposed to what you see in a lot of places where people hang out in Ethiopia, where people go there with their crowd and they stick to their crowd, and there's very little. It is nice to go to a new place. It's better when you go to a new place and you suddenly befriend strangers, and together you create a new scene in that place. That's some of the most enjoyable times I've had. And so, even the what's it called, the Stoics,
right?
And Stoicism, which is an Aristotelian way of thinking, which is to say they assume happiness is the end of all life. So how do we get to happiness? Stoicism can be very self-helpy at times. One of the things that they argue in Stoicism is it's very important to not be like the crowd. Dare to be
to
different.
Stick out.
Yeah, dare to be different, like a Capricorn, like the astrological sign Capricorn.
Right.
Is the guy the adventurous
He's the one. Like who reaches out
reaches
on the
out.
top.
Yeah. I find that Capricorns tend to be like that actually, but it's like
Actually, Sagittarius seem to swing in a little bit. No, Aquarius, they're a little bit whack.
Aquarius is also thought
They're
of
like,
as trying to be different.
the
Right,
innovator.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Those two, but regardless of astrology, I'm just using it as an example. Like it's, I'm just saying, like the idea of being different and being set apart often offers you opportunities that fitting in and kind of staying down does not. And so that's the paradox, right? That's
the difficult.
That's the trade-off, right? Do I want to fit in or do I want to be more like the rugged individual? I mean, in American thought, American ideology is all about the rugged individual. It's all about go west your range, the frontier, whatever. And there's a reason that America has had all this invention and this influx of technology and has gotten to the place that it is mostly through a more private investment than public, because there is also this mentality of just do you go out there and be like a Capricorn or a Sag or something like that, and then there are other ways in which Americans, in my experience, myself included, to the extent that I'm an American, are a lot less social and a lot more socially awkward, or to have tendencies to be. A lot of Americans grow up just sitting around watching TV all day. That's what you do in the States. You watch TV. Which makes you, in a sense, exposed and usually often entertainment. Self-absorbed, and not as socially aware or socially cognizant. And of course, those things aren't mutually exclusive. But on a spectrum, Ethiopians tend to be much more social. From my experience, are much more social people. At least people in Addis Ababa. I can't really speak for the country.
Like in regional states, they're very humble.
But it's also because all you have is other people.
Right.
Like all you have is your community. Yeah. When you, there was this whole thing that I was getting into, which was Timothy, who you were saying to have on, who I had on.
I was very glad by that.
Yeah, he was great, and I can't wait to have him on. Timothy, if you're listening, come back on as much as possible. I learned so much from him.
Yeah, he's cool.
Older Black Americans and African American gentlemen into Rastafarianism and very knowledgeable, self-educated. We talked about sports. We talked about race. We talked
poetry.
About poetry and all kinds of things. We were discussing this with him as well.
He mentioned the point where he said the point where he wants to belong. He said something like I think, right?
Yeah.
I heard a little the podcast notes, and it's kind of cool. The belongingness, what he feels. Sure. It's kind of cool.
Sure. I mean, it's the same.
It's different for Black African Americans,
but it's the same Zionist project as Israel. We're talking about the Jewish experience. It borrowed the language of Rastafarianism, borrows the language of the Old Testament to find Black Zion in Ethiopia.
Right.
But it's the same. It's the same notion of let's return, let's find home again. But there were a couple of other things that we spoke about in that discussion.
I remember that the belongingness. I remember that, and about the Black Power movement.
Yeah. I mean, it was in that context that we were talking about community, which I got really interested in and went back and re-explored. Communitarianism is the concept that the Black Panthers were pushing.
Right.
So in their dealings with the police and their desire to arm themselves, but their whole drive was, let us meet the needs of our community. First. It's very different from communism. They read Mao, they read the Little Red books and all that, but communism is very one size fits all. It's very let's spread this doctrine. It's a science. We know it all. Blah blah blah. This is no. Let's fragment. Let's just focus instead of unifying, instead of strength in numbers, economies of scale. Let's just focus on what are the needs of our community: housing, water, even protection from the police. Because the police was.
They used to even learn martial arts.
Yeah, all kinds of community services, which is still for Black people who are very conscious. It tends to be, why should we care about? And we were talking about this with him as well. Right. Why care about what's going on? There was with the Civil Rights Movement, this was very successful. There was a retreat from the international stage by the United States, and Black Americans tend to be very focused on what's right in front of them. We got enough problems, is the mentality. That's too bad in a sense, because Pan-Africanism is an awesome thing. I love Pan-Africanism. But I also love the other extreme, which is the community stuff. We just forget even what's happening in the state next to you or even nationally. What does my community need? How can I contribute to the need? Food, shelter, water. Of course, some of that economically means more connection globally or nationally, but still, with the ultimate goal of making sure that you take care of your neighbor and your neighbor takes care of you.
Fighting against crime. And,
right. And also that helps to combat the other problem that came up in the 70s at the time of the Panthers movement, which was the influx of drugs into these communities, which isolate you and individualize you and feed a certain narcissism and feed certain kinds of mental illness. To combat that, to combat the influx of drugs, and to combat the influx of illnesses of despair, which we're now seeing in Ethiopia a lot, one of the ways to do that is to be connected somehow or some way to the community and to help out.
But they've always been connected with the community. Like with Abasha people, we've always, like, since centuries ago, there's always this influx of abronet.
Yeah.
You know, it's not new for us. It's always been there. The new thing about us is that is dismantling. We're becoming more individualistic, and that's like what's going on. Condos came around. Safar Beitoch, the Mafhararis Jammeru, it became demolished, and people are more individualistic approaching it.
Well, and a lot of that has to do with capitalism. But we have ingrained in our culture all kinds of mahabar. I think we were talking about someone.
Yeah, people like who are very committed to Mahabir and it did associations.
Is another one, yeah.
Yeah,
but
like
qabalis, which are built into the state, but all different communal organizations. Right. Because for a lot of people, that's all they have. I mean, Iddir is a fascinating. I mean, a lot of people have written about Iddir, but it's a fascinating. Oh, do you? Are you? I mean, the burial aspect, the burial association in Iddir, is itself a very interesting thing because it's so primal. One of the ways in which our anthropologists signal
and Uqub as well.
Uqub as well, right? But like Iddir is like one of the ways in which you signal having arrived at a certain marker as human beings in the development of human beings is the burying of the dead. Because I will not allow one like me to rot on the street. It's a reminder of one's own mortality. It's a obvious health. It's a health hazard, and it's respect to that individual. And so the least we can do, our basic thing is, no matter how little money you have, we will put aside a certain amount of money to make sure. Now, I would argue that another way to put it would be to change our rights and norms and to change the situation such that we can always bury people, but and that it should be low cost to bury people. But still, I like the idea of it.
It depends. Like, I mean, like, life genre is different. Like, they're like low income people are high income people are middle income people are. So like you can't just be like and people are different. They want maybe extravagant funeral. Maybe they want low cost funeral.
I mean, they're not being funded by the Iddir is for the basic
but just some contribution ይደረጋል, but like it depends on the like deceased family ምን እንደሚያደርጉት of the outcome.
Yeah. How do you feel about this question about burials and so on? Because they're uprooting people, people I know, older people, family members, who are being taken out of their graves and buried in mass graves after 20 years or so on, which to me makes no sense on so many different levels.
Okay, I could tell you on that point. So, okay, like I grew up like in a neighborhood called I grew up in Saris, the district, but particularly I grew up in Edus Yosef or Saint Yosef. So Saint Yosef, the area used to be like a burial ground, like from rich people to like low income, middle income, but the church was formed 102 years ago by Queen Zewditu when she was building churches. So, but around there, like there are deacons, they used to live there, but it was like a famous burial ground. Like if you were somebody, even Abba Bakila, his burial ground is around my neighborhood, the runner. So it's sad just to see like 20-year-olds, 50-year-olds like burial sites demolished, and they're just they're built something on it, or they're just put in some mass graves or something, and that's kind of frustrating. It's just like I don't know. I think it's all about the money being responsible for that.
Yeah,
it is. It's all about the money. At the end of the day, it's just they just wipe out the cemetery. They build something on it because they rent it to some
Right.
rich construction or something because they profit out of it.
Sure, yeah.
It doesn't. It's all, at the end of the day, right now, in the country that we're living in, capitalism is their main game. So
Yeah.
it's sad and religious.
I just think I understand the health aspect of it, but to me, first of all, if people are like, well, it's not our culture to have the other forms, either burning the body or, which I actually think is the best. I think it's beautiful from an ecological standpoint. Burials are better, right? But a lot of people are uncomfortable with thinking of themselves as being eaten by worms and so on. And there's beauty in the fire kind of taking you. And in the grand long scale, I mean, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, you are going to turn into stardust anyway. But you kind of are taken out of the ecological cycle, which isn't the best thing. If a human being stops doing that, it's going to disrupt the cycle. But besides that, there are health hazards and whatnot. But I just...
To point on that, once, I'm so sorry I cut you off. Avshoch demo, like Ethiopians, they believe that afar ነበርኩኝ ወደ አፈር እመለሳለሁ.
Exactly, yeah.
So it's not about ashes. It's like afar name. Like I am the
dirt or the dirt, yeah.
Like the ground, the earth.
Right. No, I get that. Okay, so the point I was making is, we say that, but then we are willing to. Is it really part of our religion or our rituals to bury someone for 20 years and then unearth them and put them in a mass grave? Right, like what? Like to me, I don't understand it. There's got to be other ways. There's mausoleums. It's not just burning, right? There are other alternatives. Or here's another thought: put them in a mass grave to begin with. You're gonna put them in the mass grave for 20 years, right? Put them in. But people are like, oh well, I want to be able to pray at that site. We'll pray at the mass grave site. But to me, to bury someone, and like here's where we're temporarily burying you, and then we're gonna take you out and then throw you in a mass grave somewhere unmarked, like. I have no problem with mass graves. I spend zero time thinking about what's going to happen to my body afterwards. But I think for the other people, first of all, costs. Somebody close to me.
Logistics and the whole.
Yeah, I had somebody close to me say once, if I wished that when I was dead, I could just push a button and I would just disappear into nothingness. Wow. Is what they said, because there's so much cost and there's so much trauma. There's so much weird stuff that go into what to do with the body and this or that. I think the best thing to do is. To make it as so I was what I was going to suggest to me is this is one area where I like what Islam does, the Muslim rites, which are I remember when the king of Saudi Arabia died and they were like they're putting him in a naked or I think they wrap you, but they just put you in the ground and that's it. There's no pomp. There's no circumstances. There's no this weird thing with the the cradle outside of the ground and all this decoration and all these like sanitary problems that we see in churches here where people are buried for 20 years and then thrown into unearthed and thrown like none of it makes any sense to me. But
like in terms of Islam, what do they
as little as possible. I mean, they have a grave, but there's no. I don't think there's a tomb. I should be careful about talking about their rites, considering I don't know, or the rituals, considering I don't know all the details. But it's very bare bones. It's very minimal. You just everybody's equal when they meet their maker is the notion, which I really like that idea. Really like that idea.
It's kind of true.
Yeah. Yeah, or we should be. I mean, the silliness of the ancient Egyptians, the pharaohs, like, I'm going to bring all my wealth and my gold and my this and my that when I die, so I'm going to wrap myself. The Egyptians were obsessed with death.
Of course,
they were obsessed with sex and obsessed with death. Yeah. And it's like, how can you spend your entire life setting yourself for death? And their idea of the afterlife idea was just the exact continuation of life. They were just terror. They lived in terror of dying, and it was all about setting themselves up so they can continue living even in death. Which is no way to be, right? It's no way to be, especially since I'm sorry, you can tell yourself whatever you want. None of us knows what happens.
But I like their approach into embracing death. It's not like they're not scared of it. They're not shocked.
They're terrified of it. They're terrified of it. Yeah, the thing is, they're terrified of nothingness. So they set themselves up in their mind that the afterlife is going to be just like this one. So that I won't go anywhere. So I'll bring my food, I'll bring my gold, and that's why they wrap themselves. In their case, the mummification is to preserve the body entirely, so that when you go into afterlife, it's a morbid, dark kind of culture. Of course, it produced all kinds of incredible things. Right?
Of course, with their civilization.
Yeah, they believe that the pyramids actually used to glow from afar. You know about this? The same mechanism for creating electricity through a complex waterway system that Tesla and others would come up with later, that they had this underneath the pyramids, and so they had some electricity.
So it shined.
Yeah, they had some electricity, some basic electricity, way back in the Egyptians, and that they believe that the pyramids at the very top used to glow from afar. Can you imagine? Like it's thousands of years, 10,000 years ago, whatever it is, and you're going through the desert and you see those pyramids aglow from afar. And
it's like
that's evidence
light.
of, in that world, in those days, that's evidence of, the existence of something beyond imagined. They can't conceive of electricity in the way we do. But all of this was a roundabout way to talk about transitions, about languages, and so on. And I think
we've a very interesting talk.
Yeah, we covered a lot of ground.
Of course.
Yeah. Keep learning Arabic. Please teach me a few words at some point. Of course, you're bad at it. You just started. Nobody's going to anything.
I would love to write. Like, it's very interesting. I'm very excited about the writing.
Oh yeah, and the writing, and they write right to left.
Yeah.
Right to left.
Even when they read, it is.
Yeah. It's
like
getting used to something like that.
Yeah.
It's like almost like dyslexia to us.
Yes.
Looking things, mirror images.
Interesting.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, Bailey.
Thank you for having me.
And please come back
it's always
anytime.
Been a pleasure.
The pleasure is all mine. So we'll wrap up now. You've been listening to Ras Temari Radio, Offense Necessary, where we discuss everything about politics. Have a good night, everybody.
Bye. Should I touch it?
Just close it down.
Huh?
Just close it down. Okay, it's not responsive. Can't.
Maybe I don't. What the hell?